The SEC went from 5 teams in the college football playoff more than likely to 3 in about 6 hours. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. It's Monday, November 25th. We have a big week coming up this week in college football. We, of course, have so many games to preview and look forward to. We're going to get there. We also have a very interesting version of the College Football Playoff Committee rankings coming tomorrow night. But before we can start to look ahead, and there are takeaways from this show that will be forward-looking, we must first look back. There's a bunch of takeaways from this past weekend that we want to make sure we get to. I appreciate you being here. You guys actually led to us having our biggest week ever last week as far as the amount of time consumed, the amount of views, the amount of downloads, the amount of podcasts, all this other stuff is our biggest week ever. So we very much appreciate the support you've shown the show. We look forward to seeing that support continue to grow because we promise you here at ACF, we promise to deliver the best previews and the best analysis, or at least we're going to strive for that. We promise you that. So let's dive in. Some key takeaways from week 13. Takeaway number 1, Ohio State might have the best roster in college football after all. After all, they are the first Big Ten team to win multiple AP top 5 matchups in a single season in nearly 20 years. The last team to do it was an Ohio State team in 2006 that got to the national championship. So maybe a sign of things to come for the Buckeyes. And man, this past weekend, this was the one we've been waiting for. This is the performance that you've been craving from the Buckeyes. A complete performance, multiple phases getting involved, offense, defense, and in special teams. Let's start with the defense because I think they deserve the most credit. It's not about where you start, though, in the game. It's really more about how you finish. First series of the game, after the offense goes 3 and out, the Buckeyes on the defensive side, 11 plays, 70 yards, right down the field, Indiana touchdown, 7-0 lead for the Hoosiers. Not great, right? 3 third downs converted on the drive. Davis and Igbinosun was called for multiple pass interference penalties. You're sitting there thinking like, all right, here we go again. And then they did not allow a drive of longer than 8 yards until the middle of the third quarter. And that possession still ended in a punt. The next series after that, they went negative 11 yards. So what I appreciated most about this, and we had talked about this for now a little while, I thought that Ohio State at times had been a little bit vanilla. And it's because I think Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, acknowledges, hey, I have a talent advantage pretty much every single time I walk out on the field. So I don't want to do anything that's going to lead to cheap yardage for the opposition. Let's keep it base. Let's keep it vanilla, no busts. Let's keep it in front of us. Bend, don't break. Our defensive line will get home. We'll force them off the field because we're going to have a negative play that we create throughout the game. Now he's like, nah, you know what? We're still going to fire our gun. We're still going to do some things on that side. And it's been impressive to watch them ratcheting up the pressure just a little bit, the aggressiveness just a little bit. And as a result, 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Cody Simon was phenomenal for the Buckeyes in this game. And outside of really the opening drive and the 75-yard touchdown drive in the fourth quarter, they allowed 6 yards of total offense. Think about that. Excluding the 26 plays on their 2 scoring drives, they allowed 6 yards to an Indiana team that had been averaging in the mid-400s. That's an impressive showing. Okay, so I love what I've seen. 151 total yards allowed. It's the fewest allowed by a team in a game against an AP top 5 team since 2015. That was when Michigan State held Ohio State to just 132 yards. The offense, I think they got to figure out something. Okay, we talked about the offense and how I just feel like I'm missing a little something there. Okay, I'm missing just a little bit. You got to figure out a way to run the football. Right now, they're 48th in the FBS in rushing, about 178 yards a game. And with their running backs, with their talent profile, they should be able to be a top 20 group running the football. They should. And if you remove TreVeyon Henderson's run with a minute left or so, they had rushed for just 74 yards on 26 carries. Now, it's a good rushing group that they were going against if you look at the numbers, but I just want to see more in the run game there. And maybe it's because of the offensive line having to constantly be reshuffled. This is the fifth different offensive line combination that they've been forced to play this year, several of which forced by injury. We know that, with Josh Simmons going down after 6 weeks, with Seth McLaughlin going down in practice last week, their left tackle and their center respectively. We know it's going to be challenging. I mean, you move your left guard Hinsman into center now. You have to just completely, guys are moving around. And I think it's tricky. I think it's really tricky to have to be an effective group running the football when you've had that much movement. But down the stretch, when they get into the playoff and when they get another crack at Oregon and when they play potentially for a national championship, they got to get something out of their run game that's more than just the random big hitters from time to time. And then I look at the receiving core. I am really optimistic about what I'm seeing there because they're teams that are kind of bracketing Jeremiah Smith. They're saying, hey, we cannot let Jeremiah Smith beat us, which is opening the door for Emeka Egbuka and more specifically Carnell Tate. Tate down the stretch might be as important a player on this team as anybody because if you have a third receiver that can play like a first receiver, who are you covering them with? If your top two guys are accounting for Egbuka and for J.J. Smith, perfect. Carnell Tate, he'll eat. And it should be a really good position for him to be in. Then finally, the special teams. They had not had a return touchdown in 10 years. So I was surprised by that, by the way. Really surprised by that. So it was impressive to see the punt return touchdown. That was significant, but it was also big to see the capitalization on the muffed snap there by the punter for Indiana. So the other question that I think a lot of people are kind of talking about right now, did they need to score at the end of the game? To me, I say yes. With how brash Curt Cignetti's been, with how outspoken Curt Cignetti's been, and all the bravado we've seen from Indiana this offseason and throughout the year, I don't blame Ryan Day for punching in another one there at the end of the game. It's not surprising, and I don't think anyone should feel too bad about it. Tremendous performance from the Buckeyes in all three phases, and something that I think can be built on heading into the game against Michigan, and then ultimately in victory, the game against Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. Takeaway number 2, Indiana found out yesterday just how big the gap is, okay? And now I'm not taking anything away from Indiana. I think everyone associated with Indiana right now should appreciate very much how far ahead of schedule they are at this point. How many people in the preseason were sitting there thinking, yep, Indiana is going to be playing a top 5 matchup in week 13. I don't even think Curt Cignetti would tell you that was likely, okay? They're probably going to be in the college football playoff. They probably should be in the college football playoff, whether you agree or disagree with what's gone on elsewhere. Indiana has at least taken care of business, and you got to give credit to that. But Saturday was a reality check that while Indiana is good, there is a massive difference between a college football playoff contender and a national championship contender. There's a huge gap there. And we saw just how big that gap was. This is an offensive line for Indiana that got off to a really nice start, and then they had almost nothing going. Their offensive line got pushed around over the course of, after that touchdown drive, about 8 straight possessions where they couldn't get hardly anything going whatsoever. It was a completely dominant effort by Ohio State's front 7 defensively, and it was in large part due to Indiana's complete inability to block Ohio State after that first drive. There were countless pressures. There were countless sacks. There were a handful of different examples in which guys were making mental mistakes. Guys were getting physically beat, but are also giving up some mistakes in which guys were unblocked and shouldn't have been. It had to have been super frustrating for Curt Cignetti because a team that's confident and a team that's surging and a team that's improving, to see them get beat physically, you can live with that. Ohio State's got better personnel. But to see them get beat on a few different occasions because of mental errors had to have been increasingly frustrating for that Indiana coaching staff. And then compounding some of the errors made by their offense, you cannot spot a team that's as good as Ohio State, 14 points on special teams. To have James Evans drop the snap, getting tackled for a 23-yard loss. Ohio State gets the ball at the 7-yard line. 3 plays later, Travion Henderson in with 21 seconds to go in the first half. All right, can't happen. And then second half, Indiana goes 3 and out. They hit the 52-yard punt. Caleb Downs gathers it up, cuts it up the right sideline all the way across for a 78-yard punt return to the house. That's 2 scores in just over 2.5 minutes of clock time that took a game that was knotted at 7 and made it 21-7 immediately. So really difficult to overcome mistakes all along. Now, I still think Indiana, like I said, I still think Indiana will find their way into the college football playoff. But to expect Indiana to now find themselves and go on and win the national championship feels pretty unlikely. I think we found out today that while Indiana has a crazy high floor because of their consistency and execution, they also have a relatively lower ceiling than that of some of the teams at the top of college football. Indiana in this performance falls to just 1-71 all time against AP top 5 teams. That is tied with Tennessee for the most losses against AP top 5 teams all time. They have a lot to be proud of. They have accomplished a lot this year. They deserve to be praised, but we also all acknowledge that at this point, to expect them to make a run in the postseason, it's probably not going to happen. Takeaway number 3. Alabama has a pretty obvious Achilles heel. Now, here's how you play them. Okay, you play keep away. You keep their offense off the field. You get out to an early lead. They'll probably get a little impatient and they'll probably get a little one-dimensional. If you look at the game plan that Oklahoma used, I'm talking not talking specifics to how they moved or stunted defensively, not talking specifics to their formation usage offensively. I'm talking simply from a complementary football standpoint. The game felt eerily similar to what Vanderbilt did several weeks ago against Alabama. Now, it wasn't the same type of offensive performance that we got from Oklahoma as we got from Vanderbilt. But if you look at the amount of plays that Alabama has and the fact that they felt like they were constantly playing from behind, it was a very uncomfortable situation to be in if you're Alabama. Alabama had 4 offensive possessions in the first half. They went 3 and out on 2 of them, and they had only 27 offensive snaps in the first half of that football game. They're just not a team right now that can play from behind. They're not a team right now that's going to beat you by dropping back 30 plus times, 40 plus times in some cases, and expecting to win the game. Against LSU, we saw the perfect recipe for the Tide. They ran the ball 48 times. I think they threw it like 18 times. And as a result, it led to their best offensive performance against a decent opponent all season. Well, that was not the recipe against Tennessee. And that was certainly not the recipe this past weekend against Oklahoma. We'll start with Alabama's offense. To run for just 75 yards on 30 attempts, about 2.5 per carry, it's their lowest rushing total of the season. And I think that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And while so many people are pinning the blame almost exclusively on Jalen Milroe, I would encourage you to look beyond the quarterback position. Because while Milroe did not play well, he played poorly in the game. There's no denying that. There's no spinning that. There's no one that can make a justification against that. 2 of his 3 interceptions were bad decisions and bad throws. One at the end, I don't think that was on him. That was on the right side of the protection where he got hit as it was throwing. Ball's deflected up in the air. It's secured for the interception. But if you look at some of the play around him, his supporting cast, I thought 4 different wide receivers could have made catches and didn't. Massive drops that killed drives. Ryan Williams, one of their best players, I thought had maybe his worst performance as far as consistency is concerned. TJ Dupree, one of the most reliable weapons that they have, dropped the pass. A couple running backs dropped the pass. The right side of the offensive line struggled. throughout the course of the game. And I thought Oklahoma did a great job of attacking the right side. How often they aligned guys on that right side and made things a little bit confusing and made things a little bit uncomfortable. And they were super aggressive on the edges of the defense as well. So Alabama's offense, while Milroe deserves to shoulder some of the blame for sure, he was not alone in the subpar performance. As far as Alabama's defense is concerned, to give up 257 yards on the ground is never going to be a situation where you can try to defend it. 205 in the first half, massive time of possession advantage in favor of Oklahoma there in the first 30 minutes. And in their final 2 first half possessions, 11 plays, 51 yards and a field goal, and then 12 plays, 67 yards and the touchdown to take that 10-3 lead. Over those 23 plays, they ran the ball 19 times for 96 yards and ate up nearly 11 and a half minutes of game time. So the keep away, the ball control, all that stuff led to Alabama's offense being really uncomfortable. And then in the second half, Alabama's defense made adjustments and was better, frankly, in the second half. But at that point, it was already in a position because of the turnovers by Alabama's offense. They weren't going to likely be in a position to be super successful. So difficult night for Alabama, really bad night for the offensive execution. And another thing too, a bad night as far as just mannerisms and body language and things like that on the sideline. And that comes down to some of the players. That comes down to how things are handled in adverse situations. There were times where it just felt like, man, something was off from the beginning, and it was compounded. The anxiety on the sideline was compounded by the behavior of some. I don't think people are giving enough credit to Oklahoma. I really don't. I think Oklahoma had a really, really solid plan. And part of that was addressing what Alabama wants to be offensively, attacking the edges of Alabama's offensive line on both sides, mostly on the right, but on both sides, making the reads for Jalen Milroe a little bit cloudy with the run game. There was a lot of gray area with some of the reads that were created by Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's defense, we've long praised how good of a group that is, how proud of a group that was. They saved their best for last. And many of those players playing their last game there in Norman, they played a phenomenal football game. Danny Stutzman was terrific. Kip Lewis was terrific. Billy Bowman was terrific. And I thought the offensive plan, while simple, was constantly stressing a part of the defense for Alabama that at times has shown some vulnerabilities. And they hadn't really been attacked like that in a while. It was, like I said, somewhat similar to the eye violations and the candy that Vanderbilt ran at them. And I thought Oklahoma executed at a really high level. So while a lot of the attention nationally will be on Alabama and their ineptitudes, Oklahoma and Brent Venables, their defensive staff and their offensive staff deserve immense credit for a complete performance and an opportunistic performance by turning over the tide 3 times there throughout the game. Takeaway number 4, we got chalk at the top, man. Texas, we'll take Texas, we'll take Penn State, we'll take a few of these other teams at the top, and we'll just tell you, yeah, kind of, it was a fine game, maybe a takeaway or 2 from each. Let's start with Texas. They're ranked 3rd, 10-1. They beat Kentucky 31-14. Quinn Ewers, a couple touchdowns on the game, leads to, I think it's 23rd passing touchdown this season. That exceeds his total from a year ago. According to Steve Sarkisian, though, Quinn Ewers got his ankle kind of tweaked a little bit on a kind of a hip drop tackle, and be curious to see. He was kind of favoring it a little bit. Didn't look like he was able to move very well. They were able to run the ball, gave it to Wisner, the offensive line, the tight ends, all those guys did a really good job. And their ability, I think, Texas to now lean into the run game is going to be really beneficial moving forward. That the offensive line played really well, and to run the ball that way, they ran for 250 yards in the performance, including 158 from Wisner and about 100 yards from Jaden Blue. He had 96 yards, so he was close. And then on the other side, they were able to dial up a lot of pressure and keep a lot of heat on Kentucky's quarterbacks, both that played in the game. So the only thing that would be a little concerning if you're Texas going into the game this upcoming week against a desperate A&M team is that Kentucky was able to create some chunk yardage right up the middle by running the football. That's something that needs to get shored up, especially knowing how A&M will likely attack them. Penn State, 26-25 over Minnesota. That's 10 wins now for the third consecutive season. That's their longest streak since the 80s, the early 80s. So credit to James Franklin and credit to his staff. Look, Minnesota had 2 weeks to prepare. They're coming off a bye week. They were healthy. They came out with a good plan. They're big. They're a physical team. They got a bunch of guys that knew that this was their Super Bowl. And I honestly believe we have had at times moments of criticism for James Franklin. I think you can make a case that this is one of the best coaching performances that he's had. Felt like he kind of took the fight to Minnesota, especially in the second half. There are some times when you have the superior roster where you coach not to lose. You know what I mean? You coach not to lose. You coach to kind of conservatively. You're the better team. You're the better roster. So let's not screw it up, guys. That wasn't the way James Franklin coached this past weekend. I thought he coached to win. You look at Drew Aller. There was a moment where Drew Aller was beginning to show some emotion. James Franklin went right over to him, calmed him down, relaxed his quarterback. He had a fourth down fake punt that they executed in the game. By the way, I was shocked still that PJ Fleck in Minnesota didn't have their defense on the field in that situation to kind of force Penn State to punt it. Instead, the fake punt worked to perfection. They had 2 fourth-down conversions on the final drive of the game to put the game on ice. It was probably some of the most aggressive clock management, some of the most aggressive coaching I've seen out of James Franklin since he's been in Happy Valley, and he deserves an awful lot of credit for the performance. I think had he not pulled some of the strings he pulled, they might not have been victorious on the road against a quality Minnesota football team. And then Notre Dame. Notre Dame destroys Army. This is Notre Dame's 5th win by 35-plus points this year. That's tied for the second most in a season in program history. They had 6 in 1912. So who doesn't remember that season? The Irish are really looking good, man. They're rounding into shape to the point in which you feel really good about them. And this is what I think was most impressive is their offense. Not like they had the ball the whole game. They had 47 offensive snaps. But among those 47 offensive snaps, 10 yards were gained on 19 of those snaps. So 19 different plays that went for 10 plus. You look at the big thing when playing against Army is defending the run, right? We already know how good Army's rushing attack is, how they came into the game averaging 330 yards a game. Well, for the first 3 quarters, they had 129 yards on 38 carries. So I'd say that was pretty clinical. Then you look at their offensive drive chart for Notre Dame. They had 7 touchdowns and 2 missed field goals and 1 turnover on downs inside the Army 2-yard line. You know how many times they punted the ball? 0. That's something I always like to see. Jeremiah Love, another impressive day, just 8 touches, which is pretty impressive. 68-yard touchdown, 14-yard touchdown. Also had the touchdown reception, which could be impressive. What a jump, by the way. The leap into the end zone, amazing as well. How did Army score in the game? Well, face mask and offsides on 4th down and an illegal hands to the face. That was how they scored on their first drive. So it was really never a doubt, never a competitive. Notre Dame's one of the best teams in the country and is ranked deservingly. Takeaway number 5. The SEC went from 5 teams in the college football playoff more than likely to 3 in about 6 hours. Let's start with Ole Miss. Florida, 24. Ole Miss, 17. I think Ole Miss's playoff chances are pretty much done. This game, I think, closed where the Gators were about a 2-touchdown underdog. And you look at the game, too, how Ole Miss coming into the game had allowed just 80 yards rushing a game. They were a top defense in the country against the run. And the Gators, talking to their coaching staff before the game, they said, we think that number is a little misleading. because of how good they've been when it comes to sacks. Just having them line up and defend the run is not something that a lot of teams have tried. We believe we can do it. That's basically what the Gators staff said. Well, did they ever? Montrell Johnson, his return to 100%. He goes for 127 rushing yards and a touchdown. First time he's recorded 100-plus rushing yards in consecutive games over the last couple years. Ole Miss turns the ball over 3 times. 2 interceptions by Jackson Dart in the fourth quarter that were really bad decisions by Jackson Dart. Look, everything was going to be underneath. Everything was going to be forced by Florida to be kept underneath. Dart gets really impatient, throws unnecessarily over the top of the defense, but you couldn't get on top of the defense. He ends the game with 2 really bad decisions. And then the name of the game for Ole Miss was the short yardage. J.J. Pegues had entered the game against Florida with 12 short yardage or goal line carries this year. Every single one was either a first down or a touchdown. He had not been stopped, not one time this season. Well, on Saturday, he converted just 3 of 6. And those 3 stops were on drive enders. 2 of the 3 were in the red zone. Situational football has been Ole Miss's undoing this year. It happened against Kentucky, it happened against LSU, and it happened again against Florida. And as a result, what I think might be the most talented team in college football is not likely to make the college football playoff because of the mistakes they made along the way in their 3 losses. Let's go next to Auburn and Texas A&M. Auburn snapped a 14-game losing streak against AP-ranked opponents. They win. It takes 4 overtimes to do it. Jarquez Hunter adds 3 rushing touchdowns. That's most in the game in his career. And what I think's been impressive about watching Auburn these last couple weeks has been the growth of not just Keandre Lambert-Smith's been there all season long. Like Keandre Lambert-Smith at wide receiver, the transfer from Penn State, he's been reliable from the get-go. But Cam Coleman has really come on these last couple weeks. 128 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, the most receiving yards in the game by an Auburn freshman since 1999. So really impressive. And what I found interesting about this game, you look at A&M, what's been A&M's bread and butter this year, especially when Marcel Reed has been in there as their starting quarterback, has been about running the football, pounding the football, complementary football. Well, for them to drop back as often as they did, I think was a little bit of a mistake. I think they need to get back to at some point here against Texas. They got to commit to the run game. They're going to have to commit to the run game because expecting Marcel Reed to drop back and throw it that often is not going to be beneficial. And then the defensive line to get gashed the way they got gashed at times in this game was a little bit troubling. Terrific performance from Auburn. Auburn is one of those teams this year, though, where you look at Auburn, you think to yourself, okay, Auburn has talent. Auburn can play at a high level, but the record doesn't reflect how good they are. Like Auburn, while people will always say, and I think it's a completely ignorant thing to say, you are what your record says you are. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I'm not saying that Auburn needs to be in the college football playoff. I'm not going that far. What I am saying, though, is that Auburn, on the right day, is capable of playing with and beating anyone in the sport. But like they've proven this year, they can also beat themselves with the best of them. The loss against Cal is still somewhat inexcusable. The loss against Arkansas, inexcusable. The loss against Oklahoma, inexcusable. They have had countless mistakes this year that have led to them coming up short. So this is still a remarkably dangerous team at 5-6, and they'll head to Alabama hoping to punch their ticket to bowl eligibility next week in the Iron Bowl. Takeaway number 6, the Big 12 is who we thought they were. I'll explain. Just hang in there. I'll explain. We'll start with Arizona State's win over BYU, 28-23. If you missed the end of this game, take a couple seconds to just watch. It's like chaos in a nutshell. It's almost just the most college football thing that happened this past weekend. The field storming by Arizona State's fans before the clock hit 0. There's 1 second remaining. Takes about 15 minutes of actual time to clear the field before BYU can run a Hail Mary of its own. was just wild. All right. Guys, stop rushing the field. You were a favorite in the game. Like, let's stop with the field storming stuff is fun when you pull off a big upset. I'm proud of you. Arizona State was favored. Like, what are we doing? Anyways, it was chaotic. It was wild. And Arizona State now 6-0 at home this season, their longest home win streak to start the season since 2013. They have 4 straight wins. That's their longest win streak since 2016. Cam Scatterbo is amazing. 147 rush yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, first career game with 3 rushing touchdowns, and now BYU's lost 2 in a row after starting the season 9-0. If you could sum up the Big 12 in a game, this is probably the one. Fun and chaotic all at the same time. Let's go next to Kansas, who continues to be the giant killer of all giant killers. They've won their 3rd straight game, all against ranked opponents. This time they beat Colorado convincingly. They're the 3rd team in AP poll history to pick up 3 ranked wins in a season, despite entering each game with a losing record. The other 2 teams that have pulled off this incredible feat, the 1958 Tennessee Volunteers and the 1954 LSU Tigers. So pretty wild, but it kind of shows you Kansas was one of those teams in the first 8 games of the year. The ball could never really bounce their way. I mean, they were always in the mix. If you look back at their margin of defeat, the games were always close. But man, they were just unlucky in the first 8 games. Well, now things are starting to go in their direction, and the wins are coming as a result. Devin Neal deserves a helmet sticker in this game. Historically great performance. 207 rushing yards, 80 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns total. He's the first player with 200 rushing yards and 75 receiving yards in multiple games in Big 12 history. And since 2000, he's the only player with 200-plus rush and 75-plus receiving and 4 scrimmage touchdowns in a game against an AP-ranked opponent. So think about that. Historically significant performance from the veteran running back for the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, Colorado, couple big moments. To give up 331 rushing yards in the performance is alarming. They give up nearly 6 yards a carry. That was a group that had improved tremendously from last year. They were giving up going into this game around 140 yards a game. So they had improved drastically in the front 7 defensively, but it wasn't really against super high quality competition. Let's just be real. Travis Hunter, 8 catches for $125, 2 receiving touchdowns. Definitely still in the Heisman mix. He's the first player since 1980 with 10 receiving touchdowns and 3 interceptions in a season. First player with 1,000 receiving yards and 3 interceptions since 80. 11 receiving touchdowns this year. That's second most in the season in Colorado history. So there's a lot of reason to back up his Heisman candidacy. But I do think that how this thing went, like how is the level of competition that he's faced this year? I'm just asking the question. I think it's worth asking the question. We'll see whether or not it matters in the eyes of Heisman voters. The Big 12 currently has 4 teams that are sitting at the top of the 16-team conference. You got Arizona State, Iowa State, Colorado, and BYU. They're all 6-2 entering the final week of the regular season. To make things even more crazy, you have 5 more teams that are sitting right behind them that could theoretically get to the Big 12 championship game. So Kansas State, Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. They're all sitting there at 5-3. So you have 4 teams at 6-2. You have 5 teams at 5-3. By my count, that's 9 teams that are technically still alive for the Big 12 title game. Now, the most likely scenario for all the tiebreakers and all this other stuff, assuming victory next week by these 2 teams, the most likely scenario is Iowa State and Arizona State. They win, they're likely going to be playing in the Big 12 title game. The good news is these games are all kind of staggered, so we'll be able to take them all in. Friday, Colorado's hosting Oklahoma State. Saturday, Arizona State is on the road against Arizona. Kansas State is going to Iowa State, and BYU hosts Houston. So the simplest path to a title game matchup would be if 2 of those 4 teams won and the other 2 lost. It's so fun, but it's kind of what we've said from the beginning. The difference between Team 1 and Team 10 in the Big 12 is about this much. And if those of you are listening on the podcast, it's about an inch that I'm holding up right here. The margins are so slim. It's a super fun conference to watch. But at the same time, the level of the highest ceiling and the level of floor, the ceiling's not very high and the floor is pretty tall. But these teams are a little bit inconsistent on a week-to-week basis. But my goodness, I love watching it. That's for sure. Takeaway number 7. It's really crazy right now just how much things can change in a year. You look at college football in a nutshell, and there are 9 or 10 teams this year that I'm going to point out as just completely different from 2023. And I think this is going to continue to happen more and more. Few different reasons for this, okay? You can go from the outhouse to the penthouse in 1 year. You can also go from the penthouse to the outhouse in 1 year. A couple reasons. One, you obviously have the portal. Okay, portal is paramount. And guys entering the portal and or bringing guys in from the portal, when you add 40 guys a year on your roster potentially, you might not be very good, or you might catch lightning in a bottle and be great. Takeaway number 2 on why this is I think the buy-in from a culture standpoint at some of these places is not great when you are relying on guys that really don't have a real investment in the program outside of collecting a big check from the collective. Then that's going to lead to their performance on a week-to-week basis from time to time. I think takeaway number 3 is because of the portal, teams and players are no longer sitting as redshirt sophomores waiting their opportunity as a redshirt junior or senior because they want to go start somewhere, and then being developed at a blue blood program is no longer as appealing as starting at a mid-tier Power 5 program. So as a result, we're seeing teams that were awful last year elevate and teams that were amazing last year fall off a cliff. Couple examples. Let's talk first about the outhouse to the penthouse. Indiana, they're currently 10-1 after a 3-9 season last year. Why? Because a lot of the guys they brought in the portal have been great. They've had a very favorable schedule. Scheduling matters when it comes to evaluating what these teams are capable of. If Indiana played a schedule that was like Ohio State's and they had to play 3 top 5 teams, maybe it wouldn't be the same, but still scheduling matters, portal matters, buy-in matters. Things in the stars have certainly aligned for Indiana with the 10-1 start after a 3-9 last year. Arizona State, they're currently 9-2, 2 wins away from a college football playoff berth after a 3-9 season last year. Pretty significant change of events for Arizona State. And a lot of people made a huge deal about Jaden Rashada, their quarterback from a year ago, the blue blood, there's a blue chip prospect. He leaves. They're now better at quarterback with Sam Levitt. So Arizona State, with what they've done now on defense too, I mean, they're a lot better on defense than they were a year ago. BYU, 5-7 last year, 9-2 this year. Got off to a 9-0 start, have lost 2 in a row, but still a team that's very different from where they were a year ago. Illinois, they were 5-7 last year. They're currently 8-3. Baylor, they're 7-4 after a 3-9 last year. And if not for a Hail Mary conversion by Colorado, they'd be 8-3. And they'd be right there in the mix alongside BYU and Arizona State to potentially get in the Big 12 championship game. So things can flip in an instant with what teams have by way of the portal. And then there's also indications of the other side too. Michigan, they're currently 6-5. They went 15-0, won the national championship last year. What about Washington? They're currently 6-5. They were 14-1, runners up in the national championship last year, but they got depleted. Coaching staff leaves. Tons of guys in the portal, not the same roster. Arizona, currently 4-7. They were 10-3 last year. One of the most disappointing teams in college football, and then Florida State. They just won their second game this weekend, but they were a team that was sitting there 13-0 last year, missed the playoff. Now they're 2-9. What's it going to be next year? Who's it going to be next year? It will be fascinating to watch, because if you're a team, if you're a fan of a team who's struggling, hey, success might just be 1 year away. And if you're a team that's on top of the college football world, enjoy it, because it might not last, given the performances of some of those blue bloods that have fallen off this past season. Takeaway number 8. Want to give a shout out to some teams that have punched their ticket to the postseason. These teams are bowl bound. With 1 week left in the regular season, there are 77 teams that have reached bowl eligibility. That includes, those that will go to the 12-team playoff. There are 82 bowl spots available this year. 13 schools reached bowl eligible this past weekend. So want to give credit. And I know there are people that have continuously tried to water down the importance of bowl games. You will not find it here on this program. Like, bowl games serve so much. One, they serve the communities that they're in with a lot of charitable giving, and the players that are in town for that week being able to serve in the community. So they're tremendous in the communities that host them. 2, you get 15 extra practices for your young players. Now, a lot of guys are opting out, so you get a really good look of your youth and whether or not they should go into spring football next year as a possible starter. And finally, guys get to go on vacation. Like, it's a long, hard season. And a lot of these bowl destinations are in really cool places. Like, several are in Florida. My last college football game was played in Orlando, Florida. I got to go to Disney World 3 straight days. It was a blast. Go to practice, go to Disney World, be ready to roll on game day. It was super fun, and those are memories that you'll have forever. So I want to give some credit to some teams that punched their ticket this past weekend. Arkansas, Boston College, Cal, Florida. They got the bowl eligible. Not a lot of people thought the Gators would be going bowling this year. They are. Fresno State, Michigan, Nebraska. You did it, Nebraska. The longest bowl, I guess you could say, longest streak in the Power 4 without a bowl berth is officially dead. Way to go, Cornhuskers. Oklahoma, they had the longest streak of continuous bowls outside of Georgia. That was extended with the win against Alabama. South Alabama, South Florida, USC, who has gotten things back on track. That was a good, gutsy fourth quarter performance against UCLA to secure the win. UT San Antonio and West Virginia. So I wanted to give some love to the teams that punched their ticket this past weekend. But we also have a few teams that are playing for their lives this upcoming weekend. A couple notables. There are 2 games in college football this weekend featuring teams on both sides that are 5-6. Winner goes to a bowl game. Loser will be going home for the winter. You always want to be in the position to win those games. I think it matters. And to have it on rivalry week, what's better than that? Virginia at Virginia Tech, both 5-6, both needing a win to get to the bowl. And Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, both 5-6. So those 2 teams win. Now that takes us up to 79 bowl eligible teams. Few other teams that need a win this weekend to get to the postseason. Michigan State, they're now 5-6. They beat Purdue. They need a win against Rutgers to get to the postseason. Wisconsin needs a win against Minnesota this weekend. Kansas, if they can beat Baylor, they'll go to the postseason on the heels of a 4-game winning streak. If you would have told me when Kansas is sitting there at 2-6, hey, they're going to go bowling, I would have said no chance. Well, they've now won 3 in a row against ranked teams. Now they're 1 win away from getting to the postseason. Auburn, if they can beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, they'll go bowling. NC State, if they can win on the road against the North Carolina Tar Heels, they'll go bowling. NC State has had North Carolina's number, but this is not the same NC State team this year. Oregon State needs it at Boise State. So an interesting game there on Friday. And then Cincinnati, if they can beat TCU, they will be going to a bowl game as well. Takeaway number 9. I have tried now for the last 2 weeks or so to help you understand conference championship clinching scenarios, and I will admit they are very difficult to follow. I think this is something, guys, that we really need to look at here as fans of college football, as leaders in college football. I love very much the leadership that we have currently in place at the highest levels of college football. Like, I have tons of respect for all the conference commissioners. I really believe that they're doing what they believe is best for the game. I think they're trying to be receptive to an ever-changing landscape. It's not easy to do, but I think they're doing an adequate job. But we really need to evaluate these conference championship clinching scenarios. They just need to be more digestible. I don't understand some of the tiebreakers. I live this every single day. I live college football. It's my life. I work literally 7 days a week throughout the college football season because I love it and I want to serve the fan. And to be honest with you, I don't feel like I can adequately serve the fan because some of these tiebreakers are far too complex. Just simplify it and help me understand it. Help all of us understand it because it's just too much in some cases. There are some that are cut and dry this week. All right. ACC championship will feature SMU against Clemson or Miami. Miami wins at Syracuse. They're in. Miami loses. Clemson will go. The SEC is also very simple. Georgia's in. The winner of Texas A&M, they will go play Georgia. Simple as that. The Big Ten, pretty simple. Oregon's in. If Ohio State wins this weekend, they're in. If Ohio State loses this weekend, then it becomes really, really interesting. Okay? There is still a tiebreaker that's in the mix. If Indiana and Penn State win and Ohio State loses, then it's obviously Indiana against Penn State, and we have not heard yet from the Big Ten what that tiebreaker will be and who has the inside track with that tiebreaker. We'll keep you posted if information comes to light here in the next couple of days. So basically, if Ohio State wins against Michigan and they're a healthy favorite of nearly 3 touchdowns, they'll be in to play Oregon there in the Big 12 title, or the Big 10 title. Big 12, by far the most complex. You have so many different scenarios, 9 teams that are currently still alive. None are in a situation where it's win and in. So it's just really crazy. I don't really know how else to explain it. Basically, Arizona State and Iowa State are the most likely to get in. If there's a 4-way tie, Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, Iowa State, it's Arizona State and Iowa State. Okay? Pretty simple. If it's a 3-way tie between Arizona State, BYU, and Colorado, then Arizona State's in and BYU is in. If there's a 3-way tie between Arizona State, BYU, and Iowa State, then it's Arizona State, Iowa State. If there's a 3-way tie between Arizona State, Colorado, and Iowa State, then all 3 have the same record against common opponents. So it depends on the final order of finish of Kansas State, Texas Tech, Kansas, and Cincinnati, which I just don't get. All right. And then you have the final option where a 3-way tie between BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. It'd be Iowa State and BYU. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But hopefully they'll just tell us who's going to play at noon Eastern on ABC on Championship Saturday. And hopefully the teams know that they need to be there. We'll find out. It's crazy. The AAC is simple. Army and Tulane. Conference USA is simple. Jacksonville State is probably going to play against Liberty. Liberty's in with a win. If Liberty loses, Western Kentucky wins, and they have a chance to be in. The MAC is still very much up in the air. Miami, Ohio is in the best position, and then Bowling Green is in the best position. So likely those 2 are in a position. There are ways for Buffalo to get in. There are ways for Ohio to get in, but those get a little bit more complex. The Mountain West is Boise State against Colorado State or UNLV. If UNLV wins, they're in. They lose and Colorado State wins, they're in. Pretty simple. In the Sun Belt, it's likely going to be Marshall and Georgia Southern, but Louisiana can win the West with a win as well. Or if South Alabama loses, it's a little complex. So it's probably going to be Marshall against Louisiana. Simple as that. Who knows? I don't really understand it. Tiebreakers need to be simplified. Please help us help you in explaining what the heck's going to be going on Championship Saturday. Takeaway number 10. We've done this the last couple weeks and have had some fun doing it. This upcoming version of the College Football Playoff Committee rankings might be the most intriguing that we've had so far. Very interested in seeing how this is all going to play out. 1, how far will Indiana fall? That's the biggest question, right? Indiana was 5 last week. Will they fall to 10? Will they fall to 9? Will they fall to 12? I don't know where they're going to fall. And to be honest with you, I really don't think there's a scenario where they fall out of the playoff. I'd be surprised if they fell out of the playoff mix. So I anticipate them falling to somewhere around 8, 9, 10, 11 in that vicinity. I do think it's likely that they go on the road for the college football playoff, but still worth noting nonetheless. Question number 2 and 3. How far will Alabama fall? How far will Ole Miss fall? Can either one potentially get back in the mix? Probably not without considerable amount of help, right? If you really look at how things are kind of shaping up, Alabama and Ole Miss likely need Tennessee to lose to Vandy. They likely need Purdue to beat Indiana. They need USC to beat Notre Dame, and that might not even be enough. I mean, I just think that it's highly unlikely, but there is something worth noting is that SMU last week was sitting at number 13. SMU is now a 10-1 football team, a chance to get to 11-1 this weekend. Alabama was 7th, and Alabama and Ole Miss, by the way, was 9th. Is there a possibility that Alabama and Ole Miss are still ahead of SMU? I don't think so, but it's just worth noting. Where is SMU relative to the SEC teams? If they're in front, then I think there's really no way for Alabama and for Ole Miss to get in. But if they are still in front for whatever reason, maybe there's an outside chance. I wanted to kind of go through and just tell you how this is all looking. Now, here are the locks, regardless of this week's outcome. Okay, so these are teams that I think have already punched their ticket, regardless of what happens this weekend in the final weekend of the regular season. I think Oregon's a lock. All right, so we're going to count these because remember, there's 12 spots. There's 12 spots, and we need to make sure we count so everybody can easily digest what the committee is likely going to tell us this upcoming weekend. Oregon, I believe, is a lock. Ohio State's a lock. Penn State's a lock, and Texas is a lock. Even if they lose this weekend, I still think Oregon at 11-1, Ohio State 10-2, Penn State 10-2, Texas 10-2. I still think they're in with everything else that's gone on. Okay, so we have 4 locks that'll get in regardless of what happens in their conference championship games. Then you have 3 more locks that are going to be in because of the conference championship tie-in, right? That's the ACC champ, the Big 12 champ, and the Group of 5 champ. So the ACC champ, meaning it's Miami, SMU, or Clemson. The Big 12 champ, depending on how that all unfolds, they're going to be in the Group of 5 champ, right? So now we have 7 spots that are gone and off the table right now. Here are the 3 teams that I believe are in with a win this weekend. And it's against decent competition too. So Notre Dame locks up a playoff spot this weekend if they beat USC. If they lose, then they fall into the uncomfortable selection day category. I still think they'll probably be in, but I don't know that for certain. And I think selection day would be really uncomfortable for the Irish if they lost this game. Just saying. So Notre Dame in with a win this weekend. Tennessee, they beat Vanderbilt. They're in with a win. I can't envision a scenario where a 10-2 Tennessee with a win against Alabama is left out, especially with the chaos that has happened between teams 7 through 12 in the last few weeks. So I think Tennessee is in, and I think Georgia is in with a win this weekend. Georgia loses to Georgia Tech. They could be bumped out. We know that Georgia is already in the SEC championship game, so they can lose this week and then still win the SEC championship game and lock up their own spot. But I think as an at-large, if they win this week, they're in. We know that the SEC champs going in, so I already have Texas assuming they win that and win the SEC, they're already in. So I think Georgia with the win this week, regardless of what happens in the SEC championship game, they'll be in. So that's 10 spots they're accounted for. 7 that I told you that are locks right now, 3 that are locks with the win this week in Notre Dame, Tennessee, and Georgia. I think likely in the college football playoff, there are 2 teams here. Likely. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I think it's highly likely that these 2 teams are in. I think Indiana, it's highly likely that they're in. And the ACC championship game loser, assuming they win this weekend, is probably in as well. So if Miami beats Syracuse, if SMU beats whoever it is they're playing, I'm blanking off the top of my head, then those 2 teams are both sitting at 11-1 in the regular season. They lose in the ACC championship game. Now they're 11-2, and they're being measured against some 3-loss teams and some 2-loss teams. Then maybe they're in a position to lock up a spot. So I think that's likely as well. So those are your 12 spots. That's it. We just went through it. I told you the 7 locks, the G5 champ, the ACC champ, obviously, the Big 12 champ. Then you have the 4 teams that I think are in regardless of outcome. That's Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Penn State. So now we're up to 7. I got 3 teams in with a win this week in Notre Dame, Tennessee, and Georgia. We're now at 10. I think 2 teams that are most likely at the moment, Indiana and the ACC championship game loser. Here is a scenario that's interesting. A spot stealer, if you will. A bubble burster, if you will. Texas A&M. Texas A&M beats Texas this week. They have 3 losses. Texas A&M beats Texas this week. Then Texas A&M would secure a spot in the SEC title game. They win the SEC title game. They could absolutely make it to the college football playoff. We already know that. They win the SEC, they're in. Probably have a first-round bye. Will be interesting nonetheless. So A&M could steal a spot. And then some teams that really need help. The ACC third-place team, whether it's Miami at 10-2, Clemson at 10-2, they're likely going to have a super stressful selection day. But if Clemson beats South Carolina, who's ranked, if Miami's sitting there at 10-2, can they potentially get in? Possibly when being measured against a 3-loss team. I don't know. So the third place ACC team, likely stressful, but possible for them to potentially get in. And like we've referenced multiple times already, Alabama and Ole Miss, are they alive? Perhaps, but they are on life support right now with probably 5%, 6%, 7% chance to backdoor their way into the field. So we'll be fascinating to watch. Can't wait to see how the committee shakes it all up on Tuesday night. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. For Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show. Our releasing on some of our games this week, our previews this week, will be a little different than it's been in the past. So just bear with us, and just follow us accordingly. It's going to be fun. We'll have shows coming out for the rankings, our rankings reaction show, and then we'll have our preview show that will come out a little later in the week as well. So lock in. We'll get you ready for rivalry week like nobody else. I can promise you that. We will have the best breakdowns here on ESPN's College YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. So for all of us here at ACF, I'm Greg McElroy. We hope you have an awesome day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.